Originally, the Simic Guild went mad with power and tried to take over Ravnica, and they swore to change their ways. But it appears that the new breed of Simic is following the same disastrous path now. Greetings, hatchlings! We are here today to talk about a spoiler from Ravnica Allegiance and the horrible implications of it. Now, to do that, what we have to do is take a trip through some magic history to sort this all out. So what you need to understand from the get-go is originally Momir Vig was in charge of the Simic Guild, all right? The Simic Guild started out as healers. They were actually in charge of tending to the life forms on Ravnica, making sure everybody was hardy and whole. That was like their main purview, right? Now, they weren't satisfied with this, so they decided to start tinkering with life forms. And this led to the invention of cytoplasts, which were essentially bioengineering that could be forced upon others. Instead of just like volunteers, they could basically force this on anybody by attaching cytoplasts to them. And this resulted in all kinds of horrors. So eventually what happened, Momir Vig just ends up being gone. He's no longer in charge of the Simic Guild. Now, they have sworn that they're not going to emulate those mistakes, and they're going to move forwards with a new philosophy where they won't be bioengineers anymore. They're only going to enhance life forms using magic. Now, slowly but surely, you can see this all fall off the rails. Basically, the Simic came up with something that they called Crisis, right? Crisis creatures are mutants that are created specifically only through the use of magic. And the point was to get away from the way that Momir Vig's Simic used to operate. Now, what I'm going to do is we're going to go through all the Crisis that exist, and we're going to end off with the spoiler card, taking a look at it, and we'll talk about how we got where we are and what it means. So we're starting out with Drakewing Crisis. Now, a lot of the creatures are sea creatures when it comes to Crisis, but in this case, it's a lizard and a drake. So we don't have a sea creature being combined here. It's part lizard, part drake, which, I mean, in all honesty, what's the difference between a lizard and a drake? Why isn't it just a drake? That part to me goes, I'm not exactly 100% sure with that. It's a little bit muddy. But anyways, let's take a look at it. It's a green, a blue, and a colorless for a 3/1 flying trampler, which is pretty sweet, honestly. I mean, that's not too shabby. And the flavor text says, cautious not to repeat Vig's mistakes, the Simic fuse life essences using magic alone. Each result is called a crisis. So this is pretty simple. This is the starting point where we can see they have indeed walked away from Vig's way of life, and they're starting a new way of doing things for the Simic Guild. You can see that the creatures that had cytoplasts would actually have what looked like kind of giant fluid blisters on them. So you don't see anything like this. This looks like a creature that was born this way. That's the thing about Crisis is they don't look like mutants that were shoved together. They do look like a natural blending of different creatures. At least that's how they start. So we've got the Drakewing Crisis, which is, again, it's a lizard drake, which to me is just, it feels like it could just be a drake. When you look at it, it just looks like a drake. The artwork is great, honestly. It does have a very fierce look to it. I like the way that they transmit the 3/1 concept with, it looked fierce. It's got a very dragon-esque head with the spikes and everything like that coming off its back, coming off of the little spikes, coming off its shoulder and things like that. And its wings look very fragile, in all honesty, and that's what transmits the whole like 1 toughness concept to me. This looks like something that could really just ferociously rend and rip into anything. It's got that lizard brain, so it's just going to be ferocious and animalistic. I love the sense of height that it's given here, kind of slantwards flying up along the one of the spires of Ravnica. I love the clouds that are going around it. And I like that you can see what actually looks like paintbrush strokes in the artwork. I don't know if that's what that is, but if you look really closely, it does look like you can actually see the brush lines, like this was actually a physical piece of artwork, which feels rare in today's age of digital artwork. So I definitely like this. I like that the art itself is colored greenish and bluish. You've got that sort of like, you definitely got the feel of the colors. I like it when the Magic artwork takes on the colors of the card that it represents. So overall, to me, this card is really well tied together. It's really well done. Everything is transmitted properly, aside from the creature type. The lizard drake part, I mean, it could have just been a drake, but if they said that, then it wouldn't actually feel Simic. So I'll forgive that part, because in all honesty, that's very, very minor. Not that big a deal. And that was from Gate Crash. That's where we start out. Gate Crash is where we start with the diverging from Momir's old way of doing things and moving on to the new thing. So the next crisis we're going to talk about is the Elusive Crisis. Now this one is a 0/4, 1 blue, 1 green, and a colorless. It's a fish mutant. It is unblockable, and it has Evolve, which says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power or toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Now this is a very interesting concept, because it's not 100% obvious how the evolve aspect works in terms of this. It just somehow, being in the presence of stronger creatures, it just somehow, like, it looks at them and learns how to evolve itself on the fly, like a rapidly, instead of evolution being like a long time scale sort of thing, it happens rapidly. It's pretty interesting also that you would think at first with the creature types, why isn't this a merfolk? But then when you actually go ahead and get into the artwork and look at it, you can see why. I mean, when you look at the smaller version, you go, okay, fish mutant, how is it like, it looks like almost like a merfolk. I mean, this isn't bipedal, obviously. The merfolk that they make now, a lot of them don't have tails, they have legs, so they can explain how they get up on land. But they do merfolk with tails as well, obviously. Now, this is a very horrific looking thing, though. It's got the fish eyes, it's got like a bony kind of hardened skull. And on all honesty, the one thing that I don't like about it from the artwork is when you look at it with that pole axe that it has there and everything, it doesn't feel like it starts out as a 0/4. So for me, that's a bit of a fail there. You have that. Now this looks like something that lurks in like the Undercity. You know what I mean? Looks like something you would find hanging out in Demirfield areas. The fact that it's unblockable makes sense. It can just submerge itself under the water and head on without really being detected. It definitely screams fish mutant. It's got a crazy, crazy face with those insane, weird half fish eyes. There's something going on with its eye where it looks like it has its pupil, but then there's a larger, like, extra part of the pupil that's bigger at the back. Its eyes are really, really unsettling. Its entire head actually is really unsettling. Moving down into this big, bloated sack under its neck. It's a really gross looking creature. It looks like a horrible mutation, honestly, to me, between a merfolk and like a hippocampus or something like that. Like, genuinely, it's really off-putting. But it looks, again, the 0/4 thing, it's got claws and stuff like that. Maybe this is just one that's evolved more by being around other creatures. I like the idea of instant evolution. It's very cool. And this is definitely a creepy, like, I could see this easily being a black creature. It's horrific looking. It's got an alien, unfeeling nature to it almost, like, maybe that's why, as well, it's a fish mutant, because you wouldn't expect this thing to be capable of truly rational thought. Like, you wouldn't expect mercy from something like this. You wouldn't even be able to bargain with a creature like this. That's my imagination, at least, of it. I really like, again, that this has the green and blue aspects in the art. It's got that green-blue feel to it, so it feels like it fits in there. I'm not sure why we can see what looks like embers from a fire coming up. Maybe it's built itself a fire, but it looks like it's sitting on the water, right? Like, it looks like it's right on top of the water. If you look behind it, you've got all the water stretching out. You've got the waterways set up above it, the bridges and everything. You can see this is obviously, again, set in the Ravnica cityscape. So they do a good job of transmitting the world to you. And the green, the whole green of it gives it kind of a sickly feel, which I think really ties in well with this particular creature, honestly. It's pretty gross. Now let's move on to the next crisis here. This one is Battering Crisis. Now this is a green and 2 colorless. This again is another aquatic creature. The Simic really like messing around with aquatic creatures, which makes sense. It's a green-blue guild, right? So for 1 green and 2 colors, you get yourself a 2/1 trampler with Evolve. So this is, again, something that evolves on the fly, right? It just grows as it goes. And that's a good way to create creatures that have basically broken the bonds of evolution and can do it like that. All they need is to see other creatures that also have some kind of advantages they don't, and they can maybe, like, they look at another creature and they can grow additional appendages that look like that. Either way, conceptually, very cool. Now, this one here, when we take a look at the artwork for this fish beast, you can see it's a bizarre combination of like a brontodon and a hammerhead shark. And it's got the crazy hammerhead head, which obviously has been reinforced for battering things down, because I don't think that hammerhead sharks, while they look like a hammer, I don't believe that hammerhead sharks have like really, I don't think that part at the front of them is really hard. I think it's just a weird evolution design that they just that hammerhead sharks decided we're going to be the weirdos of the shark world. But I don't believe that hammerheads have actually physically hard heads. But this thing clearly has some reinforced noggin action, a battering crisis, so it can just be slamming down the door. It's got the massive maw of nasty shark teeth, and you can imagine it also having the ability of sharks. Sharks can regrow their teeth very, very quickly. So I imagine that this thing could do the same. But then you've got the battering head and the massive teeth of the shark there, but then you've got the power of the body of a brontodon. Honestly, when you look at the artwork here, this creature feels like it's bigger than a 2/1. So this artwork may be depicting one that's already evolved somewhat and gained some strength, perhaps. But I enjoy the sense of motion to the artwork. You can tell that it's charging because if you look behind it, you can see that there's a bit of almost blurriness to what's going on. Just a little bit that makes it feel like it's rampaging forwards. And the people in the background, you have somebody like this, like they're caught in a moment. Like it just came busting in through the wall behind it. If you look directly above the guy in the background, you can see that the wall is all smashed up and you can see rubble flying through the air. So this is an action shot where the Battering Crisis has slammed through a wall and is still just charging onwards with no heed for what's going on. And you can see another person crouched down on the other side like they're getting ready to run. This definitely gives the concept of an out-of-control crisis, and it starts to demonstrate how even though the Simic have moved away from the old way of doing things, that there's still going to be problems with it. So this is an excellent, excellent piece of artwork from Dragon's Maze. And then we move further into the Simic getting more sketchy. Now, it's not automatic here, right? I mean, we'll get to it at the end when we really, really see that they finally come full circle. But Crisis Incubation is the next card we're going to talk about. And this is a very, very unique card for a number of reasons. First of all, it's an ability that you don't see frequently in green or blue. There are variations that do what this card does, but very, very infrequently will you see them. So Crisis Incubation is 1 blue, 1 green, and 2 colorless for an aura enchantment. Enchanted creature can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be played. Now that is normally, traditionally, mainly a white ability, but you will see it in green with some twitches to it, or you'll see it in blue as an effect with like, oh, they're frozen in ice or something like that. But mainly it's the provenance of white. Now, the second ability on it is where it gets crazy, where it's like 1 green, 1 colorless, 1 blue, return incubation to its owner's hand, put 2 +1/+1 counters on enchanted creature. Now, I like this card just as a card because A, you can use it to stop your opponent's creatures from being able to come at you and use their abilities, or B, if your opponent's not playing creatures or you want to beef up your own guys, you can put your own creatures in the incubation chamber and make them larger, right? And the Simic's growth is usually represented by +1/+1 counters. So it's a very frequent way to show growth, not just in the Simic, but overall in Magic. That's a very time-tested sort of thing. Now, Crisis Incubation, though, is a pretty dark concept because they stopped with cytoplasts because cytoplasts were being used on unwilling subjects. Now, clearly, Crisis Incubation, the way that it's played from the player's perspective, I'm playing it on your creatures. So again, we have unwilling subjects being trapped away in these incubation chambers, being transformed. And we've seen this in movies and stuff, where people are captured and transformed into awful things. In fact, I just recently watched Cowboy Bebop, and in one of the episodes, they're capturing people and putting them inside of containers where they're regressing them into ape men. Or monkey men, whatever it was. But either way, it's a horrific concept being rendered from what you are into some sort of more animalistic whatever. And you can actually see the spikes that are growing up there on the shoulders. They're very reminiscent of the first thing that we looked at. The Drake had the similar kind of spikes up there on the shoulder. So this card, when you look at the artwork, it's very dark too. It's got a very dark and ominous feel to it. You've got the face, which is being skeletonized. This is a humanoid who's being skeletonized, and you can't tell if they're smiling or if they're like got their hand in there out of horror for being in there. You can't tell if they're happy with their upgrade. If they've got one hand up, like they're almost touching what's happened to them. You can see the skeletal grimace on their face. One eye's green, one eye's red to represent the transformation hasn't really completely happened yet. Maybe this is being turned into a half fish monster, probably something aquatic. But either way, it's a really horrifying concept, and it also shows the crazy biochambers of the Simic. And if you look at the surrounding area around, it kind of looks like it's made out of biomaterial as well. It looks almost like a grown green kind of bone with spikes and stuff. It doesn't look like this biochamber was created out of metal. It looks like the chamber itself is organic as well. It's really, really flavorful art, but it shows that the Simic are totally willing to still go to their old ways of meddling around with people who don't want to be meddled with. So, another step down the path of darkness and returning to their old Simic ways, right? Moving on, we go to Renegade Crisis. Now, this is 2 green and a colorless for a 3/2. It is a beast mutant, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, this is the evolve ability, if that creature has a greater power toughness than this creature, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. But whenever Renegade Crisis evolves, you also get to put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. So it almost shows, well, not almost, what it's showing, I should say, is that this thing enhances the mutation and evolve effects of other Crisis. It's almost like a Crisis Lord, where just being in its presence hastens the evolution of other Crisises, whatever. I don't even know what the plural for it is, so use whatever you want there. Now, it's a Renegade Crisis, which means it's not under the control of the Simic. Again, showing that their creations are getting completely out of hand. And obviously, Simic doesn't really have too much of a problem with this, because they keep letting this kind of thing happen. The artwork on this one's fantastic. It's got this weird sort of, it looks almost like a half frog beast, but it's also got like a Hydra back where it's got these crazy mouths. Now, they don't have eyes, but they have these crazy mouths. Again, we see the little spikes. We see a lot of spikes on a lot of these different Crisis creatures. Now, this one's intense. You can see that it is smashed into a city square, knocked over a wagon full of these barrels of ale, and I like that it shows them just like, this is an action moment again, just a frozen moment in time where it's just knocked over the wagon. You can see the one barrel smashed open and ale is splashing out. It gives it a nice sense of size as well when you compare that to them and the people. You see multiple people running off. You see an old man standing there just staring, kind of like, You see people knocked down by it in this moment. You've got the one guy who's literally picked up in the air screaming. His hair is actually blowing back as he's quickly being whipped towards, you assume, into the open waiting mouth of this thing. Now, it has these milky, unseeing eyes, which to me makes it even more unsettling. When you're unable to properly meet the gaze of something, that is unsettling. So the milky eyes and the number of them just makes this feel even more otherworldly. And it shows that the Simic, again, are completely out of control in what they're creating. They cannot keep a handle. They're more interested in the results than actually creating controllable beasts. So this thing has escaped and it's out there making other Crises evolve and things. It's just a very, very cool concept. And then we had a random Crisis that was shoved into Magic Origins. Kind of a surprise. I wasn't expecting to see it there. And it is called the Bounding Crisis. It's 1 blue, 1 green, and a colorless for a 3/3 fish lizard. Again, the life aquatic. This thing says when it enters the battlefield, you may tap or untap target creature. Unpredictable as a storm and destructive as a tidal wave. I enjoy the concept of this card mostly. I'm not 100% sure how exactly this taps or untaps a permanent. That part to me, how would this thing showing up let you untap like an artifact or something like that, or a creature even? I don't see how there's nothing in the artwork that to me has it imbuing energy. So it feels like a tacked on ability. But overall, 3 mana for a 3/3 with flash that gives you the ability to tap or untap a permanent makes it a decently strong card. The artwork is really interesting. Now, this actually feels like a combination of a lizard and a fish. Not like the drake where it just felt like it could just be a drake. This totally feels like a crazy fish lizard. You've got the 4 legs. You've got the big lizard's tail that's all slamming up there. You've got Down along the arms where its kind of claws are coming out, you can see the fish scales. You can also see the fish scales along its legs. It has the whitish underbelly of a fish as well, because fish have that like really pale fish belly. The face is a combination of lizard and fish. You have the crested fins that could either be from a fish or a lizard, in all honesty. We've got the traditional spikes that we see on a lot of the Crasises as well, so that makes perfect sense. Its tongue has a lizard and fish feel to it. The whole thing is really well combined, and the way that it's like just splashed into the water, it does give it a frenetic, instantaneous kind of feel. So the flash does make sense as well. It is a pretty big beefcake looking Crisis. I like it overall. I feel like it's pretty good. It doesn't so much lend itself too much into the argument of the Simic being out of control, but it also wasn't put into a Ravnica set. So it was just kind of like they wanted to make a nod to Ravnica, but I don't really tie this too much into the overall flow, because we don't know exactly where it fits in the timeline for the Simic, because it's not included in one of the Ravnica sets. So I'm not sure exactly where to peg it, because they put it in Magic Origins, and Magic Origins was a weird set where they showed us the beginning of Planeswalkers and stuff. So whatever. Let's move on to the final card here, the spoiler from Ravnica Allegiance, and that is Hydroid Crisis. And this is the final piece of evidence to show the Simic have come full circle. So this is a very interesting and powerful card. It's 1 green, 1 blue, and X. When you cast a spell, you gain half X life and draw half X cards, round down each time. It's got flying and trample, and it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So bear in mind, first of all, that the first ability triggers on casting him. So he doesn't have to make it into play, and even if he gets countered, you still gain the life and draw the cards. And that, to me, makes it a lot more potent than first glance. When you look at it at first, you go, okay, all right, whatever. You know, maybe. But when you realize, oh, I get that automatically, even if they stop the spell, it ups the power level considerably. I'm glad to see as well that they're not afraid to use crazy things like half X life and draw half X cards, because for a while they shied away from stuff like that because they thought it was too confusing for Magic players, and I don't like it when they dumb things down, treating Magic players like they aren't intelligent. That doesn't make sense to me. So I'm glad they did that. So you get a flying trampler that comes out X sized, right? So if you pay a green, a blue, and 2 colors, what you're getting is a creature that comes into play with 2 +1/+1 counters, and when you cast it, you're gaining half of X, which is 1, so you would gain a life and draw a card. So for 4 mana, you get a 2/2 flying trampler, you gain a life and draw a card, and you get the life and card even if the thing doesn't make it into play. So to me, that's potent. It may take a little bit to wrap your head around, but it is a strong card. Now the flavor text in the artwork is where we see that the Simic have just come full circle and they are a menace. The Simic have become a menace. I mean, look at this. The flavor text says, Havoc is a small price to pay for data. So they're willing to inflict whatever problems on all of Ravnica as long as they can gain information from their experiments, from creating these Crisis mutants. And to me, that echoes exactly what was going on with the Simic before in their cytoplasts. They don't care about the habits. They used to be the healers who were charged with caring about Ravnica. Remember that. They used to be in charge of caring about the life forms. Now all they care about is the information they can gain from it and their own life form augmentation, which is obviously, it's like a doctor who went from healing people to now just experimenting on them, and it doesn't matter if those experiments run rampant. It's all about what the doctor can learn from it. It's not acceptable. And when you look at the artwork, you can see that this is such a menace that the Azorius have actually had to dispatch soldiers to deal with this thing. The Azorius are trying to maintain order and stop this creature. And look at it. The artwork is horrific. It's got this crazy sort of, oh, you know what we didn't talk about? Sorry, I didn't mention the creature types, which is amazing. It's a jellyfish Hydra beast. What a combination of creature types. And you can see that they've somehow altered the jellyfish DNA to create this gigantic air sac that allows it to float and has all kinds of what looks almost like brains, but it's most likely just air sacs and like helium. It must float through some kind of gas sac contraption, right? So you've got the gases there floating it up. It's got all these crazy Hydra heads snapping out. Each one of those I would take to represent a +1/+1 counter. So if you played it for 2, it would have 2 Hydra heads. If you played it for 6, it would be like this one with 6 Hydra heads. And so you've got the Azorius coming in, trying to shut it down, maintain order, protect the city. And this Simic